Hello, testing. Okay, I think we're ready to begin. If I could ask everyone to remember to turn their devices off before we start, that would be great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Keach, and I am the chair of this panel discussion working with The Nest, which is a nonprofit creative agency focused on supporting agroecological producers to sell and market their produce. And we have Jess, the director, here, if anyone wants to come and speak with her afterwards. So the global fashion industry has long been characterized by intricate supply chains that span the globe, and that creates a disconnect between the consumers, or people rather, and the origins of their clothing. However, a transformative movement is taking root, challenging this established paradigm with local farmers and producers, fostering a renowned and renewed sense of connection between communities, local landscapes, and clothing culture. So this panel really aims to highlight this movement and examine the benefits and challenges and potential of growing a local regenerative fiber movement in Britain. So without further ado, let's maybe welcome the panelists here. And yeah, thank you. So I'd ask each of you maybe to introduce yourselves and to say a little bit about the work you do and the specific fiber that you work with. So I'll start with you, Jen.
Hi, good morning. So I'm Jen Hunter from Fernhill Farm, and we run a regenerative eco farm on the Mendip Hills in Somerset. Our sister enterprise to that is Fernhill Fibre, which is a fibre providing enterprise. We have about 3,000 sheep, so we have about 6 tonne of wool, and we market that as fleece, and we also commission yarns, felts, fabric, and small-scale clothing. And we're working with some bigger and some smaller brands as well.
Hello, I'm Sara, Grady, and I am a co-founder of British Pasture Leather, a new supply of leather made from the hides of cattle raised on regenerative farms, which is an enterprise I've created with my creative partner, Alice.
So my name's Claire O'Sullivan, and with my partner, Kitty Wilson-Brown, textile artist and weaver, we are contemporary hempery. We're growing hemp for fine textiles in the Waveney Valley in North Suffolk.
Hi, my name is Rosie Bristow, and I'm the co-founder of Fantasy Fibre Mill, along with Nick, who's at the front here. Our project is growing flax in Scotland, and we're also developing processing machinery to turn the flax into linen yarn. It's a sort of yarn making and machine design project.
Wonderful. So to jump right in with the first question, I think we've seen the farm-to-table movement over the last 20 years take root, and they say that fashion follows food, some say. And so I wanted to ask a question to all of you. How is the concept of farm-to-closet taking shape in the UK? Or some say farm-to-fashion as well. I'll open that up.
As a farmer, we have many, many sheep, and what I think is really special and inspirational about what's happening at the moment is we're dealing with a natural fibre. It's as variable as the weather. It comes from the land. It changes with age, with genetics, and what the decisions that we make every day on the farm really have an impact on the quality and the consistency and the abundance of those fibres that we can all enjoy in our wardrobes. So.
Sure, yeah, and my response to that was coming more from our material culture and my sense that there's a growing understanding and rejection of what we've come to call fast fashion. So just as we, have learned of the detrimental effects of fast food, I think there's increasingly a resistance to the idea of fast fashion, and that people are looking for more longevity in their clothing and in their material goods.
I'm just going to talk from the point of view of hemp. It is the most fantastic fibre, incredibly versatile. It's such an easy crop to grow. But unfortunately, we are totally missing the processing bit. So I am not really able to say right now that we're able to go from farm to fashion, but we are doing our absolute best to make that happen.
Yeah, just echoing what other people have said with fast fashion, I think people are increasingly realizing that they don't want all of their clothes to be made from plastics and petrochemicals, which currently make up nearly 70% of textiles produced. And I think there's a real growing interest in looking at locally sourced natural fibres instead. And yeah, like Claire said, in the UK, there's not really any infrastructure for processing plant fibres currently, but that's why that's the sort of main focus of Fantasy Fibre Mill, is trying to build that infrastructure.
That's great. And Jen, what specific regenerative farming practices and monitoring systems does Fernhill Farm employ to enhance and assess its impact in the Mendip Hills landscape where you live? And how do these chosen methods align with your own needs and goals as a farmer?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we've kind of been mob grazing our sheep for sort of 35 years, mostly because we didn't have very much finance behind our farming system. So when we came across holistic management, and the word regenerative probably wasn't even bounded around as much as it is these days, we came across Savory Institute. And if Leon could put this slide up. Oh, there we go. So we came across Savory Institute, and 3LM are the sort of the movement that are able to help us, to train us into rethink what holistic management is and how the impact of livestock affects the quality of the soil's performance in the future. By looking at your soils, you can then increase biodiversity. What we started to do back in 2020 was sort of long-term monitoring. That gave us an index score for our soil carbon, soil organic matters, and since then, every year, what you're looking at here, and if you can't see the numbers, just look at the colours, because it's colour-coded so that you can see we're within the sort of top 10, 20% for the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the community dynamics, which is basically the abundance of forage that is, what you see above ground. So we look at these, it's called short-term monitoring. So every year we monitor what the impact of our animals have in every single one of our fields. That then gives us the data, which gives us an index score. As long as that's sort of within a improving sort of timescale, then we can sort of market our wool, our leather, our meat as verified as regenerative. So I'm happy to talk more on this if anyone wants to afterwards. Thanks.
That's great. And it also is very farm specific. Am I right about that? It's very place-based as well, your EOV system.
Yes, it is. So it's we graze about 2,000 acres. We don't own all of those parcels of land. Some of them are dairy farms. Some of them is considered conservation grazing, so National Trust properties, even in Somerset Wildlife. And although we don't own them, we are just the graziers. And so, some of those changing scores actually relate to the fact that we don't have the power of control on those pockets of land. But, saying that, we are still able to offer a sort of regenerative improvement on specific parcels of land all around the Mendip Hills. So.
Yeah, wonderful. And that feeds into this next question. It's for you, Sara. It's how is British pasture leather creating a supply chain that recognizes positive impacts and outcomes for nature?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think it's important to start the response with recognition of the fact that the conventional leather supply chain does not make any distinction in terms of the agricultural practices in which the raw materials have originated. And Alice and I came to this work with a real desire to create an opportunity to make that distinction, because each of us were looking for ways to connect leather to farming, which may seem obvious if we understand that the majority of the leather that we use in our lives is bovine leather, which comes from beef production. And so this idea that we could start to look at leather as an agricultural product and as a product of our food system, which is actually quite contrary to the way that the dominant leather industry presents leather as a material. It would give us an opportunity to recognize and support the work of farmers like Jen, who are looking after landscapes and improving ecosystems and practicing farming in partnership with ruminant animals who can have an incredibly beneficial effect on soils and ecosystems and biodiversity. And so the way that we've gone about creating our supply chain, and it's been necessary to create an entirely new supply chain in order to achieve this goal of associating leather with farming that has positive impacts. We have begun initially by establishing a partnership with Pasture for Life, which is probably familiar to many of you, but is a wonderful organization here in the UK that convenes and fosters community amongst livestock producers of meat and dairy, and provides a certification for animals that are raised entirely on pasture. And so that partnership has allowed us to identify farms with the Pasture for Life certification. And then we, from there moving forward, have created this supply chain by cooperating with the abattoir that serves those farms so that we can collect those hides and maintain segregation and traceability on those certified hides. We have a very fortunate relationship with one of the last remaining tanneries in the UK, which gives us a traditional vegetable tanning process on that material, and then we collaborate very closely with the finishing facility to produce a material that can be used for a diversity of design applications. But I just want to make that point that it's been really necessary to innovate all of these connections and relationships along that supply chain just to achieve this goal of knowing where the leather originated and being able to recognize these farmers who are achieving wonderful things working with grazing animals.
It's incredibly inspiring that you've managed to build all of that yourselves, considering the conventional system is not conducive to that level of transparency whatsoever. And on to you, Claire. Can you give us a brief history of the culture of hemp growing in Suffolk and tell us about hemp's potential as a British textile crop?
Yes, well, I can certainly rattle through. That's my absolute pet subject, history of hemp growing. Of course, the Saxons were the first people who brought hemp to East Anglia. And then right up into the 1600s, it was a really important strategic crop because, of course, it was used for sailcloth, ropes and rigging whilst we were out conquering the waves. In this 1559, it was the most valuable crop that was imported into the London docks. 161,288 pounds worth of hemp and linen was coming in through those docks, and that's just London. Of course, there were other places around the world, which kind of feeds into your original thing about global supply chains. There's nothing new in that. It was constantly, we've had the Silk Road and whatever. The second most valuable thing being imported into London at that time was wine. Only 48,634 pounds. So it just shows you that what an incredibly important product hemp and linen are. And this is not history, but we're talking here about farming and food and how obviously important and crucial food is, but fibre and fabric is also absolutely crucial. If you're so inclined, you could do a fast 3 days without eating. 3 days without fibre, you're going to be very uncomfortable. Fully naked, you'll have no bed to lie on, nowhere to sit, no carpet, nothing. So, it is ubiquitous, but also absolutely crucial for human existence, not to forget that. So, post the 1500s, around sort of 1800s, in the Waveney Valley, where Wakelands Farm, where we grow, is located, this river runs pretty much along the border of Norfolk and Suffolk, and it was absolutely famous. This was the centre of the historic hemp industry. Was producing fine textile for clothing and household linens, sheeting, etc., which was going right across the country. Chapmen were coming from all over the UK to buy the very famous hempen cloth from the markets in Norwich and Diss, etc. And what I really want to emphasize, I have constantly to emphasize, is the fineness and quality of the cloth you can make from hemp. I think, you think one might be a bit sacky or a bit too heavy, rough, but that's absolutely not the case. Hemp cloth is very drapey and sheeny, and also, in terms of sustainability, incredibly hard wearing. If you've got a good hemp shirt, it's going to last you 25 years, and that is really worthwhile. So in North Lopham, just over the border in Norfolk, the last company making fine fabrics from hemp, Buckingham's, closed only in 1925, so 100 years ago. They had a royal appointment. They made damask tableware for the royal family and other big houses. Also sheeting. They had a special big loom for making sheets. And also they made cloth that was fine enough for underclothes. So though I can't prove this, I think I like to imagine Queen Victoria's knickers were made from Suffolk hemp. I mean, it's possible. I've actually got a tiny little piece here, very precious, of some hand spun hemp from a cloth, a Buckingham cloth, which you can touch. It's quite remarkable how fine it is. So what we're doing is nothing new. We're reviving a really important historic trade. This was a trade that actually employed almost all rural workers at some point during the year, and the loss of it actually caused massive misery and poverty, and thousands of people actually emigrated from East Anglia after the loss of the hemp trade. What was the last bit of the question? Potential.
Yes, potential as a
Well, the
British.
potential is obviously that we just make this fabulous cloth again. I'm so infuriated that in days gone by it could be done all by hand, and they made thousands of meters or yards of cloth, and now we can't make any at all. So the potential is there.
That's great. On to you, Rosie. Why is growing local flax and accessing seeds so important for farmers today?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So I've been working on a project with the Innovative Farmers Field Lab for the past 2 years, which is part of the Soil Association up in Scotland. And we've been trialling 3 different flax varieties on a number of different farms with the idea of trying to reintroduce flax growing and linen making into the UK. And it's a really attractive crop to grow. It makes beautiful blue flowers, and it's very low input. So I've had a lot of enthusiasm about it from different farmers. And it also, similar to hemp, it's like a dual crop that can be both harvested for the flax seeds and the stems of the plant that make the fabric. And in the trials, we've tried out Avian, Delta and Tango, which are 3 seed varieties, which have all performed really well. I think Delta was the tallest by a little bit. And we've also found it grew much better this year than last year. Last year was on average about 70 centimeters tall, and this year it was over a meter, about 1.10 meters. I think there's actually some sheets out on the chairs if people want more written down statistics. But yeah, it's growing really well, and it's growing the sort of patch that I grew at Fantasy Farm. We grew 100 square meters, and I've worked out what the equivalent yield would have been in terms of tons per hectare, and it came out at about 8 tons per hectare. That's the dry weight. So I was very excited initially. It looked like it was going to be about 20, but I realized that was the wet weight, and the industry standard they use it once it's all been baled and dried out. So it wasn't quite as extraordinary as I thought it was going to be. But that's still actually above average. So in France, where it is still grown on a really large commercial scale, the sort of average yield you'd expect is about 7 tons per hectare. So I think that's really encouraging that it can be grown organically, and I did nothing to it. I just planted it and then ignored it for 3 months. I didn't even weed it. And it still gave a really nice high yield, which is comparable to what is being conventionally grown in mainland Europe. So we're really excited to kind of keep going with this seed trial. And then the other sort of part of that is that we're also doing a project looking into, is it possible to get hold of seeds which aren't copyrighted? So all of the seeds that we're using at the moment are from a Dutch company, Vanderbilt, Zeden and Vlaas, but they're quite difficult to import because of various Brexit-related legislation changes to do with seed imports. And also they're all copyrighted, so you're not really supposed to save them and to regrow or to sell because they belong to the company. So yeah, my business partner Nick and Colleen from the Soil Association have been looking into alternative sources for uncopyrighted flax seeds, and we've found a company in America who are willing to sell us some uncopyrighted seeds. And yeah, Nick's been working his way through a big mountain of paperwork to try and figure that out. So it's a sort of, we don't have any very exciting news yet, but if you want to follow us online afterwards, hopefully at some point we'll be able to have some good news about yeah, seeds that we are allowed to save.
Wonderful. And Jen, what ways have you found to be the most impactful when raising awareness and marketing your regenerative wool to brands and artisan makers and fashion students, etc.?
I suppose it's the on-farm pre-processing, which is a term I've sort of coined myself because, as I said previously, the decisions that we make every day on the farm really do affect the quality of that fibre. And Andy is a very passionate shepherd. So when I say we, it's actually Andy, my partner, who is a very, very dedicated shepherd, but he's also a master blade shearer. And when you're shearing your own sheep, you actually really notice the quality of your own fibre. Because we are grazing sheep that is not on our own property, we have gone for high-bred vigour. We want a sheep that is really, really durable, grass-fed, very content in their own sort of mannerisms. So we have, we've sort of genetically selected sheep that we know are very, very good to be grass-fed. They are regenerating the landscape whilst producing meat and producing fibre. We blade shear them when they are sort of in their second trimester. So we blade shear in March and then we let them all give birth naturally in April and May. So where we're actually farming is 850 feet above sea level and we're only 12 miles from the Bristol Channel. So it's quite challenging. So we lamb when the grass is growing rather than, you know, any supplementary sort of feeding or housing. So my background is animal science. Health and welfare is my speciality, in particular behavioural patterns. So, you know, we really look at what an animal wants rather than what the farmer wants or what the agronomist says or what the, you know, we just sort of really look and are in tune with our livestock. And so pre-processing is the fact that I throw about 6,000 fleeces every year, and the greatest success is being able to share that. There's no way Andy and myself can share that amount with blades and throw that amount of fleeces and grade and sort them properly. So the greatest success is that we invite people to our farm and we train them to be shepherds, to be blade shearers, to be wool handlers. We teach students that are studying textiles that feel slightly frustrated that they are learning all the academics around textiles and don't even get any fibres to run through their fingers, really. So they would come and they would really come and spend 6 weeks, you know, on the farm on an internship style model. They learn everything from, you know, from the blade shearing right through to throwing the fleece, to grading it into batches that are suitable for yarns. If they're not suitable for a yarn, we then would create felt. Felt can be a fabric for the textile industry. It can also be acoustic insulation. It can also be housing insulation. Anything that is slightly dirty makes fabulous mulch. So the greatest success comes from, you know, hands-on and showcasing that there is no waste when you live on the land. Just to continue with that, the frustration then sort of sets in because you're only doing, one student. So recently, working with the Southwest England Fibres Shed, we hosted farmer meet designer networking, speed dating sessions, really. And that was really fantastic because we have a resource, but I don't really leave the farm very often. So I'm not mingling with designers, face to face, maybe online. But, when you want to work with somebody, you really do have to look them in the eye. And I know the face of everyone who washes our wool, who spins it, who felts it, who manufactures it into clothing, and we have a very personal relationship, and I think that is key. We know the fibre, we know the people who run it through their hands or their machines too. So
that's wonderful, and I know that from speaking with you before, you can see a marked difference between when they arrive on the farm to when they leave. It's sort of transforms their mindset and understanding in such a rich way.
Yeah,
wonderful. And Sara, how are you inspiring fashion and design professionals to rethink the way they value materials as well?
Well, as I said before, one of the things that's at the heart of the work that Alice and I are doing with British pasture leather is to really shift an understanding and a perception of the material. And it is a supply chain that is so disconnected, to your point, Jen, around relationships, that it's very, very uncommon to have an opportunity as a designer or a practitioner that uses leather as a material to go anywhere backwards on that supply chain. And so one of the things that Alice and I have begun doing in the last couple of years is offering a program that we call Field Days for fashion and design professionals to visit the farms that we are working with who are supplying us with hides. Again, these are regenerative farms who are raising cattle entirely on pasture. And that means that we can give these professionals a very visceral experience out in the field, hearing from the farmers, obviously seeing the animals in the field, but also, looking at the soil, taking in all the smells and sights and textures and sounds of that experience. And it's for the teams and the people that have come on this program, which we've done now a few times in the last year and a half. It's an opportunity that they very rarely have, really, as professionals who are working in fashion and design. And so we've made a real effort to make that a very multi-sensory experience, and including the enjoyment of a meal together with products from the farms that we're visiting. And so the importance of those programs, and similar to what Jen's described with the programs that she's hosted, is really seeing that impact firsthand and taking that in, as a sensory experience. And one of the key things that we've been able to do, I think, and I hope to begin to change those perceptions, is really encourage those professionals to interrogate the perceptions of quality. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, but leather is something that in the conventions of the leather industry, quality tends to be defined around terms of uniformity and standardization. And there are a lot of techniques and mechanisms that are used in mainstream leather production that achieve that, that can turn this natural raw material into something that's probably more akin to a plastic, actually, in terms of how standardized it is and how highly processed it is. And that's something that that we have in our production really made an effort to not assume that all of those techniques are the right choice. And so really, we've made an effort to be less interventionist in a sense in terms of how we're processing the material, which means that the resulting leather is filled with character. And it's something that I find very beautiful, the full grain of the leather, the growth marks of the animal, the scratches on the hide, and taking these professionals out into the field really gives us an opportunity to look at those, physical characteristics of the material and celebrate them as assets and as a point of beauty and as a point of quality, because we can say, the pronounced growth marks on the leather that we're producing in the shoulder area of the animal are because this animal was raised on its natural diet of grass, which means it was lifting and lowering its head a lot to eat. And so actually those growth marks should be something that we see as a real emblem of the positive impacts that these animals are having, being grazing ruminants in a landscape that is well suited to growing grass. And so really, getting that opportunity to shift those perceptions around quality is very powerful by offering these programs. And I think it also helps us, I hope, begin to get past a mentality that we've encountered at the brand level, which is really an assumption that the leather that we're producing can just be substituted for a commodity material. And I know we'll get to some of the questions about this as well further on in our discussion, but it's really that I think is a misperception, is a mistake to assume that you can take these materials and fibers that are coming from local supply chains and local landscapes and simply substitute it for a cheaper commodity material.
Yeah, that it really has to be the brand supporting and investing in the whole project, the whole proposition. And I love that both of you have opened up, brought people from the fashion world, probably in London, to actually visit the farms and the power that has versus, there's a place for certification, etc. But there's just nothing like when you are working for a brand, actually experiencing what it's like on the farm to see the origins. Wonderful. And this is a question for all of you. As providers of homegrown fibers, what links do you see between the health of the soil and landscape and the quality of the fibers that you produce?
I'll have a go on that one. The one fantastic thing about hemp is that it actually improves the soil as it grows. In history, they did manure the soil a lot, but once you've put the hemp into the ground, you don't have to do anything to it at all. So it grows totally organically. It doesn't have any insect enemies, so it never needs to be insecticides. It kills all weeds in its path. So there's no need for any weed killer on the land. Apart from manuring, if you can achieve that, it doesn't need any sort of fertilizer. We have them growing completely organically at Wakelands. And you just put the seed in the ground, ignore it, and there you go. So it improves the soil. I have got a historical record of, if you look at old maps, you'll often see hemp land. And that's because they kept the hemp on the same piece of ground all the time. There's a record of one piece of land in Hoxton, a village not far from me, where they continually kept the hemp on the same piece of ground for 70 years without any loss of quality. It seems extraordinary, but it appears to be a benefit to the land to grow hemp.
So I think flax is different, actually. So I've been saying, it's the same as what you've been talking about, but actually flax is best grown in a rotation. So traditionally, it's often grown in a 7-year rotation with other arable crops. So it's meant to work really well in rotation with wheat, and as well as like grazing, or even putting in like beets or sugar beet or other kind of like vegetables. So I think it also has soil benefits in terms of like leaving behind lots of tiny little roots and like building soil organic matter, and benefits for all of the pollinators with all of its flowers that it has in the summer. But it can be, it's not a good idea to grow flax like twice in the same spot, because it does also like take nutrients out of the soil. So it's sort of, it's a nice thing to have in a rotation amongst other arable crops. And also, where we've been growing it in a rotation with like market garden. So like I think we had it in after kale this year, and it worked really nicely.
Can I just jump in really quickly? Although you don't need to rotate the hemp, it's a brilliant catch crop because of its weed killing aspect. So if you can take that out at the end of August, it grows very quickly. You can put it in May, take it out in August. By that time, it could be 6-7 foot tall, maybe more actually. And once you've harvested, you've got a field with no weeds. So it's great if you want to put something else straight back in.
Yeah, so I usually respond to this question by kind of asking how do we define quality? And I've already sort of touched on that, but I would say again, because we are using the hides of animals that are raised on pasture here in the UK, and which are for the most part native breeds that are well suited to this climate and landscape and to those practices, we get hides that are very thick with a very strong, dense fiber structure. And so, we are celebrating that as an aspect of the quality in the resulting leather because it means it is very robust. And back to my, initial comment around longevity, it's a very durable material. And so I'm really looking to those kinds of ideas in terms of how we define quality. The aspect of beauty is also really important, but again, back to my previous comments, it sort of depends, I think, on how you've come to understand beauty in these materials, and it's not just going to be a flawless, unmarked, uniform surface, and actually I would say that something that we've found, again, often in these discussions with professionals is the power of language. And in the leather industry, there's a lot of language around flaws and imperfections that are really only describing the natural characteristics of the material. And so I'm really interested in undoing that, and really saying that's the wrong language to use to describe what is actually, in many ways, as I said before, an emblem of something that's really quite positive and desirable.
Wow, I love that thinking about the lexicon as well. I feel like you could write an essay on that or something, how it needs to change, but absolutely.
Yeah, and just to sort of conclude, being a farmer here, ruminants are just entirely happy in their most native, natural surroundings. I don't have any photos of animals in a shed. They're always in a natural landscape. That's what, makes them happy. That's what makes the farmer happy. But there is an entire sort of biosphere of microbes that sort of move around with livestock across the land. Obviously, they are urinating, there's the feces, but there's also the saliva. There's also the fact that it rains, that there's microbes all over the body of a ruminant, and those drip onto the soil, and they have a very natural sort of positive impact on the land as they're moving across. So, I think livestock on land is the future for soil improvement. So we don't have a plough, we have a cow. And so we would, if we need to do any sort of changes of our landscape, whether we, want to do some changing of what's growing there, you can just bring in the heavy hooves, or you can perhaps leave your sheep in for a day too long because they will continue eating. And so you actually don't need any machinery when you have livestock. They are the best and most efficient land management tools we have.
Yeah, and I also know that, Jen, there's a quality element that comes from the good soil into the fiber itself that's just a clear, stark contrast to maybe conventionally farmed wool that you can feel and touch, and it's beautiful to see that. Wonderful. And then this is another question for all of you. What needs to change about the typical fashion design process in order to better support the use of local regenerative fibers in the UK?
Again, building on the other things I've said, something that is very evident to me, and again, I'm talking really here about the kind of brand level, so more of a scaled production of products, that there needs to be a change in how that design process unfolds, in the sense that it should start with an understanding of the material and how it was grown and how it's produced and what its inherent characteristics and natural qualities and natural beauty may be. Too often the design process starts with a concept for a product and then sourcing a material to achieve that shape or that idea. And I think it's useful to just invoke the work of my partner Alice Robinson, who created an entire collection from a single animal and has authored a book on that project called Field Fork Fashion, which is really a demonstrative example of the design practice that I'm talking about here, which is really starting with an understanding of the material and allowing the design process to emerge from that. So that's the biggest change that I see that's necessary.
Sort of flipping the design process on its head, really, isn't it? Yeah, starting from the fiber. Yeah.
I might regret saying this, but wool is really, really easy. We have been harvesting wool from sheep for a really, really long time for the benefit of our own clothing needs. We have 60 native breeds in the British Isles. They're all over the planet because we are specialists in fibre producing sheep. I have a degree in animal science. I love genetics. We have created hybrid vigor so that we can select one breed that will bring colour, one breed that will bring crimp, another breed that will increase the length. So we can determine whether we're creating a woolen spun yarn or a worsted spun yarn or a felt. And as I say, those decisions that we make every day on the farm affect the quality of that final product, and they determine which route it can go down. So it really is a question of what are you looking for, and working backwards from it all starts with the fibre, and the fibre is connected to the land, age, nutrition. It's a real living thing that we are processing and harvesting and growing ourselves. So yeah, it is which way round, as Sara said, which way round it is so important to look at what you've got, decide what products you can make. If you want to make a different product, then, work backwards and look to the fibre. So.
So I was thinking about changes that sort of need to happen in the fashion industry to kind of get more connected to farming. I think if the fashion industry was more concerned about real transparency with sourcing, and this is actually something that's been in the news this week to do with the fashion brand Shein, and them not even knowing, the people that work for the company, not even knowing where the factories are based that they're sourcing their fabrics from. And this brings up a lot of concerns with cotton that might be being harvested using enslaved labor. And I think the fashion industry is so driven by a profit motive and by trying to source the cheapest possible fiber that they're not thinking about environmental damage or about the human rights of the workers who are producing the fabrics. And I think if there was a lot more, whether it's the industry itself volunteering to be more transparent, or whether that's something that needs to come from the government to legislate supply chain transparency. But I think, with more supply chain transparency, it would be great to be really connected and like you said, invite the designers to the farm. And if you know everybody in your supply chain, if you know the person that's doing the farming, the person that's harvesting, the person that's processing and spinning and weaving and sewing, then you'd be much more likely to value those people's time and work conditions. And, I think the sort of more local you can make it, the more likely that is to happen. I think supply chain transparency is really important.
Absolutely.
Can I add to this, just to say that I also think it needs to go beyond product design and thinking about systems design. And so, again, the work that Alice and I are doing together is really around supply chain development. in the sense of, making all these relationships and connections. Sometimes I feel like supply chain is such a kind of dull word to describe something that's actually really kind of lively and vital, and so much about connections and relationships, and so I think, especially when we're talking about the kind of brand level, I think there is, as you say, I think there's a responsibility for brands to engage really deeply in thinking about systems design and supply chain design, not just product design.
And just to finish, wool is easy. Realistically, we have a fabulous, great British textile heritage. It is easy to convert sheep fleece into a range of yarns and fabrics here within England, South Wales, or UK base. Made in England is actually very, very easy and very possible. Scale makes it challenging, but we can work together. We can work separately, but connecting, the supply chain, it is really possible. And what I talk to brands about is it's not just a one season next autumn, fashion design. Wool is growing right now on every single sheep that's alive. We don't have to decide to plant a seed, maybe the ram, but it is continually growing. It is available on every single continent, because wherever humans are, there are sheep. That's not by coincidence. And so, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. A pair of socks is a pair of socks. A jumper is a jumper. It's about making it available, and the awareness of the difference between a natural fibre and a synthetic imitation, but also perhaps where it comes from in the world. Merino is just fabulous marketing, because a lot of people wear merino and say, oh, I can't wear wool. They don't even understand that merino is wool. That's just clever marketing. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting from a brand's perspective. They can say they want to source regeneratively, but are they willing to take that systems approach to it and really understand that there's an extent you can retrofit transparency into your existing supply chain, but when you go, you can sort of override that, go direct to the farm that's, within a few 100 miles at least of your business, if you're in London as a fashion brand, and go see it for yourself.
Yeah, but it's also not that easy. I mean, leather is not, and I know there's a lot to say on the topic of the need for appropriate infrastructure for all of these fibers and materials to be more available. When I'm talking about systems design or supply chain intervention and all of those connections, it's really recognizing that we need appropriate infrastructure that can suit the processing of these local raw materials in order to make that more widely available. I mean, there's a whole other conversation around scale to have there. But while it's very powerful, for example, to do these field day programs where we're taking professionals to visit farms, there's a very complex conversation to have, not only around the need to have local processing like tanneries and leather manufacturing, but even abattoirs to help us access those hides.
Yeah. In fact, maybe that's a good segue. I'm going to come back to the question for you, Claire, but Rosie, on that topic of that missing middle of the fiber processing infrastructure, it's really all but disappeared here in the UK. So it's creating that disconnect between the local growers and the local designers and makers. So yeah, maybe you could speak on how your work addresses that gap.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the missing middle is a term often used to talk about the gap between the farmer and the finished product, and you could also apply this to grain as well with like milling. But yeah, in a fabric context, there isn't any machinery left for turning the raw plant into a yarn. And there's a few different projects happening trying to revive it. I know Malon Linen and Ireland have been reviving some really old machinery to do the breaking and scutching, which I got to visit last year, which was very exciting. But in Scotland and England, there's not even any historic examples to revive. So the project that we've been doing has been actually designing and building our own open source farm scale processing equipment. And this might seem like a bit of a mad thing to do because obviously processing equipment does exist elsewhere in the world. But we've been on some field trips to visit a scutching mill in France, for example, that does the first step of processing, and we were quoted between 6 to 8 million euros for a small version of that setup. And even if somebody was very kindly to donate that money, we'd also be needing to grow maybe like between 1,000 to 7,000 hectares of flax to make it worth having a setup of that size. And that's not even including spinning. So then we'd also need multiple more millions of pounds to set up a spinning mill, because unfortunately you can't spin flax in a wool mill because of the length of the fiber is too much longer and different. So that's why we've sort of gone on a bit of a mad journey of reinventing the spinning wheel. And I've got some samples, actually, I was going to give out to sort of illustrate what we're trying to achieve. So this is the flax in its raw, unprocessed state. And then I've got a few samples of it on its sort of journey through. I'm sorry, everybody online, you can't touch the samples. But this is it once it's been broken and scutched, which is scraping, essentially. And then these are some samples once it's then been heckled, which is a sort of combing process. And then I've also got a few little samples of some spun yarn, some hand spun, and some, very excitingly, some which we've spun on our own machines, which we're excited to show people. They're still quite thick, but they're getting nice and even. And we actually got to work this year with a great project called Let's Grow Flax. And Brigitte, who runs that project, wove using some of our spun yarn and a lot of hand spun yarn as well. And she produced this amazing linen denim, which Nick then made up into a pair of jeans. So we're very excited that we've had something that we've produced actually included in a real item of clothing, which is a big milestone for us. So yeah, we've got that on our Instagram. If you want to look at Fantasy Fibre Mill online, you can sort of see some pictures of what we've been up to. And yeah, we're hoping that this will be like a really exciting open source machinery project whereby it's not just going to be us in our little shed in Scotland building machines, but this will be an idea that will spread out to lots of people, maybe some of you here listening who might be interested in getting into flax farming or flax processing, or indeed hemp, because we're hoping, because they're so similar, the machinery can be adapted for hemp processing. So yeah, we'd really like to get people involved, and we did a pilot sort of project with Wessex last year where they built a copy of one of our machines using my rather terrible drawings, which I'm trying to improve. But yeah, they managed to copy the machine design and build something that works, which was very exciting.
Wonderful. And I know, Claire is working with one of your machines as well. And Claire, maybe you can share, in your experience, what are the opportunities and challenges of growing hemp? Surely this missing middle is also part of that.
Well, of course, one of the main challenges of growing hemp is the fact that it is licensed by the Home Office. And in order to put the seed in the ground, you have to apply and get this license. It's quite expensive, and the Home Office are quite obfuscating. They're difficult to speak to, and the whole process is quite tiresome. You have to get a DBS check to make sure you're not a criminal, and you have to show them exactly where you're going to be. You need a grid reference to which fields you're going to be cultivating. It can't be near a footpath, near a school, or even near a road. They don't want people to see that this fabulous crop is being... it's so ridiculous. So that's the first year. You have to give them the exact grid reference of your field. So obviously you've got to tuck that one in as far away as possible. By year 2, you can put it anywhere you like on your farm. So do not look for logic in this system. There truly isn't any. It's £588 for 3 years, although they just have increased that to 6 years now. It doesn't fit in with the farming calendar, so you have to apply on the 2nd of January. You get I think it's about an 8 or 10 week window. You don't know if you're going to get your license. So you can't then order the seed, because it takes quite a long time to come from France, because you can't, here. So the whole thing doesn't really work. However, the government last year did, 2023, they printed a paper called Hemp 30, where they said they would like to see 150,000 hectares of the UK being grown for hemp by 2030. So, again, we're not going for any logic, because just what people are going to do with that 150,000 hectares of hemp is difficult to say. Of course, textile is not the only thing that people want to grow hemp for. Realistically, architectural products, I think, are going to be the way forward for the growing of hemp. You can pretty much make an entire house out of hemp. Of course, it's organic, it's carbon neutral, it's got all the things. This government is saying they want to grow, make 1 billion houses in the next 5 minutes, so they're not going to be able to do that carbon neutrally if they're going with the old concrete system. So that is really the big potential for hemp. I think it's architecture products, but of course there's also food, medicine. It's a fantastically proteinous seed. It's got more protein than soya. It's a wonderful food for the human body. The oil is used in all sorts of cosmetics, shampoos, and there's something like 25,000 uses for hemp somebody's found. So the potential for hemp as a crop is enormous. The potential for hemp as textile is totally hampered by what Rosie's just explained. There's no processing. We cannot get the fibre spun in the UK except by hand. So far we've had to hand spin. Anyone who's done hand spinning knows it's beautiful, but incredibly long-winded. In history, you needed 7 or 8 spinners working continuously to keep one weaver at the loom. So, it's just not commercially viable nowadays. So that is the big problem we've got, but thank God Rosie is here solving that problem for us gradually. So those are the sort of challenges. The opportunities is the different types of products you can get from hemp, and the fact, from my point of view, that you can make this such a beautiful, hard-wearing fabric. I'm just going to do a little quote here from Lionel Slater's great pamphlet of 1724, which is all about how to grow great hemp. And he says that he's reliably told by people of credit that in France, persons of fashion and quality prefer to wear the hempen linen due to its warmth and its lasting qualities. So that is the great opportunity to me, is just we can make this fantastic fabric, but we're not there yet.
Oh, wonderful. And I got to see a bit of that firsthand on Wakeland's farm this past summer at your wonderful retreat. So I'd encourage anyone to check that out as well with contemporary hempery.
Yeah, have a look at the contemporary hempery on our website or on Instagram. We keep everything that we do on Instagram, really, because it's so obvious, immediate. But the retreat that we run in the summer is a really lovely opportunity to really understand what hemp can be and how much fun we can have while we're doing it. We always emphasize how much fun we can have while we're doing our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I'm going to throw in a bonus question. I think we have a bit of time before we go to the audience for some Q&A. But that is how it seems from everything you've been sharing with us, is there's a real need and growing sort of impulse to invite people to the farms, to actually engage people with opening the doors to the farms and these processes. So maybe if you could speak on how we can sort of get more people on farms and more people to come and visit and gain awareness firsthand, because I know even just the cost of a coach for students can prohibit a farm visit, for example, or let alone paying the farmers properly for their time to host schools or industry groups. How do we grow these visits more?
We've actually hosted quite a lot of volunteer days around the hemp, and they're always really, really popular. People are so keen. Natural fibres, like we said before, about people so interested where their food has come from. There's a huge, huge desire. And so just putting the information out there, people just do turn up. not just for the retreat, obviously, which is more of a kind of mini festival of fun around hemp, but we've had just volunteer days for harvesting. It's pretty hard work. Come out and pull the hemp. People love to do that. Volunteer days for processing. Again, it's hard work, but people really enjoy it. And that working in community to get a job done is so satisfactory. You've had such a fantastic day, and I think people really appreciate that. Because of the spinning difficulty, we ran a spinning day. And we just called a couple of spinning groups. I mean, it's not really my world before I started this. And when we opened the doors, there were 40 people outside the door of the space with their wheels under their arm. And they just sat there all day, spinning and cackling and laughing, telling stories. And we had a fantastic day. And I was a bit concerned because I hadn't actually worked this out to start with, whether they wanted to take all the yarn away. Because I was like, oh, this is a precious yarn. And they went, no, we don't want the yarn. We just want the joy of spinning the UK hemp. And off they went again. So there's a huge desire. And you just have to just put the word out and people will appear.
I love that community element. And it's also, we know this for mental health reasons as well, being in community, working together like that. Yeah, Jen, do you have?
Yeah, so we have been hosting sort of free farm open days. It's an event we call Fibre Experience, and we host them on our sheep shearing weeks. So personally, they are logistical nightmares because we're shearing 1,000 sheep and then we have a farm open day at the end of it, or in the middle of it. But what that does is it offers a true reflection of what life on a farm is like. And, natural fibres, they are real, they're natural, they're native. We can add standards like organic, regenerative, grass-fed, GMO-free, high welfare, all of those sort of standards. But people want to touch real products, real fibres. And, by offering sort of free farm access to any age and ability, there is no exclusion. There's only inclusion. That means if you're interested, you can come and see. We've got nothing to hide. We've got everything to share. And going to the funding side of it. So thankfully, we are in a natural landscape, which formerly was an area of outstanding natural beauty. There was farming in protected landscapes. We've taken full advantage of that. So although we run a free farm open day, we do actually ask for funding so that we can pay educational tutors so that they can teach spinning, beginner spinning, distaff spinning, felting, natural dyes. So we, as a landowner, we can sort of take advantage of that funding to pay professional tutors to come and share, what they've got to offer as well as what we have. We are part of the countryside stewardship, so we could sort of access educational access. One of the issues around that is it only funds under 16-year-olds, which means you generally get a coach load of 60 kids because the school wants to bring everybody out in one go and be there from, 4 hours. And if it's just me, I like small groups. I want people to get their hands on the fibre, and 120 hands and one person just doesn't really work. It's quite scary. There is pockets of funding around. And, people do pay for education. We run a wool school twice a year. That takes everyone from raw fleece through to sort of grading it, selecting for yarn. They would then learn how to wash, comb, card, spin, ply. They'll do some wet felting, some needle felting. So, we're offering access for that hands-on experience. And, individuals, they do invest in something that brings them that sort of, natural fibre therapy. But if anyone is very good at lobbying, if we could find a replacement for farming in protected landscapes, please, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. I'll just add to that to say the field day programs that we have produced I think have some potential, as publicly available programming as well, but there would be a cost because, we have to consider not only, as you say, Jen, the logistics of bringing people to a farm, but also the service that the farmer is providing with their expertise and wisdom and the time that it takes to share that. And then just, of course, all of the expenses of getting a group to have a day together. But one of the things that I think can maybe add to that experience for people is associating it again with food. And, it's something that is really important to me in the work that we're doing with leathers, to continually be reminded of the close association between this material and our food production and our food systems. And so one of the things I think we can add value to those programs is to provide, an experience around enjoying and in eating together in recognition of that. But then also I just want to say on the brand side of things, back to the comments that we've made around the necessity for brands to invest in this work. One of the things that I believe they should be doing is bringing their professional development budgets to these kinds of experiences and, really investing in their staff and the, sensibilities and expertise of the people that are working on behalf of that brand to gain this deeper understanding. And so, those wherever those budgets can be found, whether it's a marketing budget or a professional development budget, there has to be funding that goes beyond just grant and philanthropic funding for this.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for the sustainability teams sitting in those brands. Yeah, how important that would be. Fantastic. And so the last question I have for all of you is, how can we shift societal perceptions to place greater value on the materials, craftsmanship, and environmental impact of our clothing? Just a small question.
I think, it's a big question. I think, very related to the previous one, actually. I think getting people excited about where their clothes come from and trying some hands-on skills. And I think if you're involved in making something, you'll then really, really value it and want to repair it and keep it for a long time. And I think, even just learning how to do some basic like clothing repairs, patching or sewing on a button, or like darning if you're going to get slightly more complicated, I think are really enjoyable hobbies. And I think as soon as you've tried to sew a pair of trousers or knit an entire jumper, it becomes really obvious that this is like a skill that takes a long time, and that makes you want to like value the time of the people that are making your clothes and growing your clothes. So I think sort of just getting people more excited about clothes making and repair, I think will have a big role to play.
Yes, it's such a big question when you use the word society. And what are there, 60 million people just in the UK? I mean, that's a lot of society. But you can only do it one person at a time. One person learns to knit, one person who comes on the farm, 20 people come to the farm. I mean, you've got to break it down, I think. It's too big a word, too big a problem. But it's getting people individually to get their hands on the fibre and understand where it's come from. As you said, absolutely crucial.
So can I ask a question to the audience and the panel? So who is wearing wool today? So that really does look about 90% of the people that are in this room. So wool globally is only 1% of the global textile consumption. So my question, is, to everyone, where is it? Where is it going? It's on every continent, because wherever humans go, they take their little humble sheep with them, because we all love sheep. So there is a massive, it's like the forgotten fibre. It's everywhere, but it's nowhere. That's what we need to change, is that 1%. And, if I ask that in society, people wouldn't really know what the clothes they are wearing. They don't even know what they're made from. So I think it has to start with education, and it probably needs to start quite young. And it definitely needs to be, this whole sort of repair And you know what Rosie was saying, if you've actually tried to knit a jumper, if you've actually tried to knit a pair of socks that are identical, that aren't, you know, slightly bigger or, you know, whatever, you know, it isn't easy. It is a skill. And it is something that we actually should all cherish, you know, the value that's already gone into the clothes. And wool is one of those natural fibres that actually, you know, we take to the grave in our sort of ancestral sort of rituals. It's the one product that stays in our wardrobes the longest. Unfortunately, wool is very edible, but we actually should consider that as a benefit, because if you leave your synthetic clothing in your wardrobe, nothing is going to eat them. They're not even going to decompose. So we should celebrate the fact that wool is still edible, even when it's been processed.
Yeah, that reminds me of speaking to a farmer last year. They said, yeah, we do need different words for fleece. A polar fleece, that is not a fleece, actually. So there's a real need to change the language, even down to, you know, addressing the workers in the supply chains as low-skilled workers. Well, actually, you know, that's how modern economics might term it. But actually, when you go to the farm, when you try to make something yourself, you realize what a high skill set is required to make these clothes. So, yeah.
Do you mind if I just ask how many people in the room are wearing hemp? Yay, it's only me. No. Someone else, 5 minutes sign.
Lovely.
Yeah, so this suit is from Wrangler, and of course I bought it because it's 17% hemp and it's naturally dyed. Feels absolutely lovely, and I'm pretty sure I'm still going to own it when I die. It's remarkable, but Muji make a hemp range. There are a few brands that are bringing it in, but it's not easy to get.
Oh, it's beautiful. I was admiring that jumpsuit earlier, so I'll have to find it. Fantastic. Well, I think we can now open up the questions to the audience. If anyone wants to grab a mic and answer some questions. Do you have, yeah. Jess, would you want to ask a question? Oh, just wait for a mic here.
It's also one from Fibreshed, Southwest Fibreshed. But you all mentioned processing. That's a massive gap in the UK. And in Europe, there are cooperative models that congregate and aggregate and processing. Do you think that that's a model that could be replicated here in the UK?
It would be fantastic, wouldn't it? I mean, well, we have just managed to get some funding from a rural business grant in Suffolk, and hopefully we're going to be able to buy some of Rosie's machinery and make ourselves a bit of a, it's not really a co-op, but at least we could be a hub for other small-scale growers to come and use that machinery, because it's going to be used, 3 or 4 weeks of the year? The rest of the time it's just going to sit there. So we definitely would like to have that. It's not quite a co-op model, but a hub model where one person has the machinery and other people can use it.
That's great. Okay, yeah.
Thanks. I'm Christopher Stopes from the Global Organic Textile Standard, and I have to say a fantastic session. And I love this presentation of the fibre choices we have. And GOTS as a standard with environmental and social criteria is relevant to it, but also it's not relevant. It's relevant to the fact that 1% you mentioned, also 1% of global cotton is organic only. And it's mainly this thing that the biggest and most important thing is natural fibres. We need to really work on that, because the forces of darkness are forcing synthetic fibres down our throats every minute of the day, and we have to fight back against that. So I'm really not sure what the question is, apart from I was thinking, you know, how do we bridge the gap between what you're doing and something we can take to scale, apart from through working with Global Organic Textile Standard? Because in a sense, transparency, traceability was mentioned. A good standard is important, environmental and social criteria. We need to sort of form a common purpose, but I love it. So what do we do to bridge the gap?
I think when I've answered this question before, they said, it's all very well what you're doing, Jen, but there's only you. I said, but there's a lot of people like me. You know, there is a lot of sheep farmers that are adding value to their own wool. And, you know, it's who you rub shoulders with, isn't it? Almost, you know, it is quite infectious. And once you've sort of been dealing with natural fibres, you know, you actually don't go back to the dark side, you know, you don't. And so for me, that's the issue is, you know, if I asked that question in any other surroundings, hardly anyone would have put their hand up. and said that they were wearing wool. Yeah, I appreciate it's pretty cold outside, but for me, I think it's how to get brands that will support what we're doing, and there is a movement, and it is getting stronger. And thanks to your work as well, we have these standards, and yes, we have to pay to be pure. We have to pay to prove that what we're doing is regenerative, it is organic, it is certified. But really, what Rosie was saying, I saw that video online too, where they couldn't even say where their cotton was coming from, and these big brands are going to take a massive
production. So it can be done. It's happening on mainland Europe. It's just that we're lagging far behind.
Great. I have a question. Oh, yes, online. Yes, exactly. Question from John online. Are there other crops that can be used for fibre in the UK, such as nettle or New Zealand flax? Yeah, Rosie?
Yes, certainly nettle. I don't think it's a crop as such, but it grows so abundantly in the hedgerows. But again, it's all got to be hand processed at the moment. So it's something you can definitely do for yourself. You can make beautiful fabric from nettle completely for free, just using your little fingers. But it's not a commercial crop, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely nettle. I think New Zealand flax is a completely different plant variety that's not at all related to flax, which is quite confusing. So I think somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think New Zealand flax, which is very leafy and doesn't have the stems that have the fibre in, I don't think that can be made into fibre. But yeah, I'd say flax, hemp and nettles are the main sort of plants that grow really well in the UK that you can make into fabric.
Yeah, and I think what I'd like to add here is, we're talking about natural fibres from plants and animals. There is natural fibres, but they are synthetically synthesized to create a semi-man-made, semi-synthetic fibres, and vice versa. So we have to be careful. What you can do with wool and what we're doing with hemp and with linen and with leather is, they are kind of very, very natural processes. There is no chemical synthesis that's happening between the fibre and the finished product. And, there's various other, products out there, bamboo, tencel, and I'm no expert, so I'm not going to sort of comment any further, but, it's about understanding the transformation that fibres go through between the farm and, the sort of fashion industry, that we have to pay attention to that detail too.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say about the bamboo thing. I think you're right. Like that, the way that bamboo is made into yarn is by completely melting the whole thing down chemically and then re-extruding it. And so, depending on the type of factory, it can be very polluting. There are some factories use closed loop systems where they keep all of the nasty chemicals inside and reuse them again and again, but others don't at all, and there's a lot of like effluent and sort of nasty waste, and it's very difficult if you're trying to buy bamboo or tencel fabric online. It's really hard to figure out like which types are made in which factory and how polluting they are. So I think that is something that is used a lot with greenwashing, because it's made of a plant, but it's not made in a natural fibre process.
Yeah, the natural process we're talking about is starting with a piece of straw, getting the fibre out of it, and then just weaving it on a loom. It's process heavy in terms of handwork, but there's nothing else to be added.
Yeah. It's really truly circular back to the earth. Yeah, absolutely. Question there.
Just to kind of give an example, but this question isn't purely for you, Sara. As quite a few of us in the room probably know, so the British leather industry in Walsall has been absolutely decimated over the past 25 years. And I was really interested in terms of what you were saying around highly traceable materials for producing goods. And I was wondering what role you see as potentially these materials grown by agroecological principles that are traceable could play in terms of regional regeneration across the UK?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, actually kind of building on some of the comments in the last few questions, one of the sort of next stages of development for British pasture leather will be to look at whether we might be able to play a role in creating or reviving some of that processing infrastructure, because, as you say, the British leather industry has been vanishing. And, whereas there would have at one time been many facilities producing leather, either as a tannery or a courier, which is the term for the finishing stage of production, there are very few such facilities left. And we, as I said at the beginning, are very fortunate to work with a couple of those that are giving their providing us with the service that we need to produce traceable material connected directly to the farms that we're working with, but also, the expertise and the wisdom and the knowledge that's there is so precious. And, so losing those facilities means losing that knowledge. And very sadly, one of the only teaching tanneries in Europe is located here in the UK at Northampton University, the Institute for Creative Leather Technologies, which is closing this year, and that is a huge loss, in terms of the future of this industry. And so Alice and I, in our work with British Pasture Leather, have really, launched a new vision for leather as a material, as I said earlier, to become a material that is associated with landscape and is associated with food systems and local agriculture. And there is a small vanguard of others in the UK who are, joining this in different ways. So James Allen, Cotmarsh Tannery, Jack Millington, Billy Tannery, and Andy Rumming, Pasture for Life Farmer. So there's a handful of other businesses and people who really, I think, are sharing in this vision, and all of us are, putting forward this idea that that leather, not only as a durable, long-lasting, useful material, is something that should have a place in our material culture moving forward for all of the reasons that we've talked about today, but also, again, that it could play a role in the viability of local food systems, not only for the farmers, but we didn't really get a chance to go into the role of the abattoirs, but that the value of that raw material could contribute to the viability of abattoirs, which are so essential to local sustainable meat production. So, it's like looking at this material as something that can drive so much of that regeneration in these local economies and in local manufacturing. But the crucial thing is having that knowledge and having those facilities. So that is work that we are embarking on this year, to look at whether we might be able to play a role in creating some new processing infrastructure to do that.
I've got a question online for you, Rosie. What's the estimated or target cost for the open... Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Is it on? All right, I'll use this one. That's better. Okay. Rosie, yes. This is from Robert online. What is the estimated target cost for the open source flax processing machines compared to the 6 to 8 million euros?
Oh, that's great question. So as they're open source, which means we're providing the instructions on how to build them openly online, the cost will just be the raw materials you need to build it, and then if you're putting in your own time, then that will be very cheap. So I think we costed up a project for Wessex, which was about £10,000, and that was for 3 different machines. So that's for like all 3 kind of a breaking machine, the sort of scutching and heckling, which gets you to this stage, and then the drafting and spinning machine. Obviously, it depends on your personal skill set. So if you're not a carpenter or not a welder, you might need to pay other people to help you build the machinery. But yeah, we're trying to keep it like very cheap. And also if you're reusing bits of wood and metal that you might have on your farm, or if you have access to a 3D printer, then it could be even cheaper than that.
That's great. Another question? Yep. Oh yeah, just a second to the end.
Thank you so much. It's an amazing, interesting panel. I'm an architect and I am a vegetarian chef, so I see definitely the connection of all these natural fibers in the architecture industry and the building industry. So I've been using sheep wool for insulation, which was absolutely incredible, but I think it's really hard to advocate that because of there's a lot of prejudices against it, and so I'm really advocating that. So I'm hoping to push this more forward. So for the hemp, I'd like to get more connected with Claire because I think there's a massive potential. I don't know whether anyone has reached out to B Corp businesses because that's what we just got registered at, and I think there's a lot of potential for connecting you all with B Corp businesses to, provide sustainable manufacturing processes and materials. And my other question was, has any one of you worked with any universities, masters in sustainable textiles or masters in sustainable fashion? And then another thing for everyone to watch the Mother of Pearl collection documentary, because it opens your eyes to what it really means to make a sustainable fashion collection. Oh, okay. Sorry, that was what I watched recently, and also the Dior, perhaps the Scotland journey that they've just been documenting.
There is actually, it's just not on, is it? There's a firm in Suffolk who's just had all her products properly certified so that they can be used and will pass building control. A name's actually just escaped my little brain, but I'll find it for you. She's got all the insulation panels and so on all ready to go.
Okay, I think.
Could I answer that question? Sorry, just jumping in. So the part about being involved with the university, I should have said this at the beginning, but there's too many things to talk about. I'm part-time doing a PhD in textiles and engineering, and that's come with a lot of quite exciting opportunities to work with the engineering students actually on the machinery design, and also to do some workshops for the textiles students on the textile side of things. I'm at Heriot-Watt University in Scotland, so they have a great textiles department and also a great engineering department. So it's really well placed for this kind of project. And one of the bits of research I'm looking into is using sustainable textiles in a healthcare setting. So NHS Scotland has got a lot of goals for 2040, I think, to cut all their carbon emissions, including things like the petrochemicals that are used to produce polycotton and polyester materials. So I'm looking at, would it be possible for Scotland to grow all of their own scrubs, for example, just as a kind of like imaginary future exercise. But the numbers I'm coming up with at the moment are actually looking very reasonable. I think it was just over 1,000 hectares of farmland, which is less than 1% of Scotland's arable farmland would produce enough flax for all their scrubs, which is, quite an exciting vision for the future.
Very exciting. Well, wonderful. I think we can all agree there's a huge amount of innovation and inspiration amongst you panelists. So if we could all just say thank you so much to the panelists.
Oh, sure. We were just going to invite you up if you'd like to see any samples of our materials. I have some leather swatches. There's examples of hemp and flax and wool here. Yeah.